Marcus Chen pulled his black Mercedes into the parking garage of his downtown office building at exactly 6:30 a.m., just as he had every morning for the past 15 years. As the CEO of Chen Industries, one of the city's largest construction companies, his days started early and ended late. Success demanded sacrifice, and Marcus had made plenty of them. The elevator whisked him to the 40th floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city he had helped reshape. His assistant, Jennifer, was already at her desk with his coffee and morning briefings prepared. "Good morning, Mr. Chen," she said, handing him the steaming cup. "The quarterly reports are on your desk, and you have the board meeting at 9. Marcus nodded, barely looking up from his phone as he scrolled through overnight emails. "Cancel my lunch with the Peterson Group. I want to review the Harbor District project instead." "Sir, that's the third time you've postponed that meeting." "Then they'll know how serious I am about getting the best deal," Marcus replied, disappearing into his corner office. The morning passed in a blur of conference calls, budget reviews, and contract negotiations. Marcus thrived in this world of numbers and deadlines. Everything had its place, everything had a purpose, and everything could be controlled with the right strategy and enough determination. At 2 p.m., dark clouds began gathering outside his window. Marcus glanced up from his computer, noting the change in weather with the same detached interest he might show a stock market fluctuation. Weather was just another variable to account for in construction schedules. By 4 p.m., the first drops of rain began pattering against the glass. Marcus was deep in conversation with his project manager about a delayed shipment when the rain intensified into a steady downpour. "We can't afford any more delays on the Harbor District," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Find another supplier if you have to. I don't care what it costs." "Yes, sir, but with this weather. Weather is temporary. Our reputation is permanent." Marcus turned back to his computer, dismissing the concern with a wave of his hand. As the afternoon wore on, the storm outside grew fiercer. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled through the steel and concrete of the building. Marcus barely noticed, absorbed in reviewing architectural plans that would soon transform another section of the city's skyline. Jennifer knocked on his door at 6 p.m. "Mr. Chen, I'm heading home before the storm gets worse. Is there anything else you need?" Marcus looked up, surprised to see how dark it had become outside. "No, go ahead. I'll be here for another few hours." "Sir, maybe you should consider leaving early, too. The weather service is saying this could last all night." "I have work to finish," Marcus replied, already turning back to his documents. "A little rain never hurt anyone." After Jennifer left, the office grew quiet except for the sound of rain against the windows and the steady hum of the air conditioning. Marcus worked methodically through his files, making notes and sending emails to his various department heads. At 8:30 p.m., hunger finally forced him to take a break. He decided to walk to the deli across the street rather than order delivery. Fresh air would do him good, even if it meant getting a little wet. Marcus grabbed his expensive overcoat and headed for the elevator. The storm was worse than he had expected. The moment he stepped outside, wind-driven rain soaked through his coat. The streets were nearly empty, with most sensible people safely indoors. He walked quickly toward the deli, head down against the weather, when something made him look up. Across the street, barely visible through the curtain of rain, he saw a figure standing perfectly still on the sidewalk. At first, Marcus thought it might be someone waiting for a bus or taxi, but as he got closer to the deli's bright windows, he could see more clearly. It was a woman, and she wasn't trying to find shelter. She was just standing there, letting the rain pour down on her. Marcus paused at the deli's entrance, something about the scene striking him as odd. The woman wasn't moving, wasn't looking around, wasn't even trying to protect herself from the storm. She seemed frozen in place, and there was something in her posture that suggested complete defeat. Then he noticed the small figure pressed against her side, a child, no more than 4 or 5 years old, clinging to the woman's leg. The little one was trying to hide under what looked like a thin jacket, but both mother and child were completely soaked. Marcus felt an unexpected tug of concern. In his world of boardrooms and business deals, he rarely encountered such raw human vulnerability. Most problems could be solved with money, strategy, or negotiation. But standing there watching this woman and child in the storm, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: helplessness in the face of someone else's pain. He ordered his usual sandwich from the deli, but found himself glancing out the window every few seconds. The woman hadn't moved. If anything, she seemed to be sinking deeper into herself, her shoulders curved inward, as if she were trying to disappear. The deli owner, an elderly man named Giuseppe, who had run the place for 30 years, noticed Marcus's distraction. "Bad night to be outside," Giuseppe said, wrapping the sandwich. "Some people got nowhere else to go, though." "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Giuseppe nodded toward the window. "That lady there, she been standing in that spot for almost an hour, just standing, like she waiting for something that ain't coming." Marcus felt his chest tighten. An hour in this storm? With a child? "Maybe she's waiting for someone to pick her up," Marcus suggested. Giuseppe shook his head sadly. "No, Mr. Chen. I seen that look before. That's not waiting. That's giving up." The words hit Marcus harder than he expected. He had built his entire life around the principle that giving up was never an option. There was always another strategy, another angle, another way to win. But looking at the woman through the rain-streaked window, he saw something that challenged everything he believed about human resilience. Marcus paid for his sandwich and stepped back outside. The storm seemed even more violent now, with wind that threatened to knock him off balance. He pulled his coat tighter and hurried toward his car. But something made him stop. The woman was closer now, and he could see her face more clearly. She was young, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair plastered to her head by the rain. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her shoes looked like they had seen better days. But it was her expression that stopped Marcus in his tracks. She wasn't crying, wasn't calling out for help, wasn't displaying any of the emotions he might have expected. Instead, her face held a terrible emptiness, as if she had moved beyond tears to some deeper place of despair. Her eyes stared straight ahead, seeing nothing, while the rain continued to pour down on her and the small child who clung to her with desperate trust. Marcus stood there for a long moment, feeling the cold rain soak through his expensive coat. In all his years of building his business empire, he had prided himself on his ability to assess situations quickly and take decisive action. But this was different. This wasn't a problem he could solve with a phone call or a check. This was raw human suffering, and he had no idea how to approach it. The child looked up then, and Marcus saw wide, frightened eyes in a small face that was too thin and too serious for someone so young. The little one's lips were turning blue from the cold, and Marcus realized that whatever was happening here, it couldn't continue much longer. He took a step forward, then stopped. What would he say? What could he possibly offer that would make any difference? He was a businessman, not a social worker. He dealt with contracts and profit margins, not personal crises. But even as these thoughts ran through his mind, Marcus found himself moving closer. Something about the complete stillness of the woman and the vulnerable trust of the child had broken through his usual detachment. For the first time in years, the measured, strategic part of his mind fell silent, and he acted purely on instinct. The rain continued to fall, turning the city streets into rivers and washing away the carefully constructed boundaries between different worlds. And in that storm, a successful CEO was about to have an encounter that would change everything he thought he knew about success, failure, and what really mattered in life. Marcus approached slowly, unsure of what he would say or do. As he drew closer, he could hear the child's quiet whimpering, a sound that cut through the noise of the storm like a blade. The little girl was shivering uncontrollably, her small body pressed against her mother's leg for warmth that wasn't there. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, raising his voice above the wind and rain. "Are you all right?" The woman didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge that she had heard him. Her eyes remained fixed on some distant point as if she were looking through the storm to somewhere else entirely. The child, however, looked up at him with those wide, frightened eyes. Marcus stepped closer, water streaming down his face. "Miss, you and your daughter are going to get sick out here. Is there somewhere you need to go?" Still no response. Up close, Marcus could see that the woman's clothes were not just wet from the rain, but worn thin from many washings. Her shoes had holes that let water pool around her feet. But more concerning than her appearance was her complete lack of reaction to his presence. It was as if she had retreated so far inside herself that the outside world no longer existed. The child tugged at her mother's coat with small, cold fingers. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Mommy, the man is talking to us." The sound of the child's voice seemed to pierce through whatever fog surrounded the woman. She blinked slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep, and turned her head toward Marcus. When their eyes met, he saw a depth of pain that made him take an involuntary step backward. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice hoarse. "We'll move." "No, wait," Marcus said quickly. "I wasn't asking you to leave. I was worried about you both. You've been standing out here in the storm." The woman looked down at her daughter, then back at Marcus, confusion flickering across her features. "Standing?" "For over an hour," Marcus said gently. "Giuseppe at the deli noticed you. Are you waiting for someone?" A bitter laugh escaped the woman's lips, so soft that Marcus almost missed it. "No," she said. "No one's coming." The child pressed closer to her mother, and Marcus noticed how protectively the woman's hand moved to rest on the little girl's head, even in her distracted state. Whatever else was happening, her maternal instincts remained strong. "My name is Marcus," he said, crouching down so he was closer to the child's eye level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The little girl looked up at her mother, waiting for permission. The woman nodded slightly. "Emma," the child whispered. "It's nice to meet you, Emma. And your mom?" "This is my mommy, Sarah," Emma said, her small voice gaining a little strength. Marcus looked back up at Sarah, whose attention seemed to be drifting away again. "Sarah, I don't know what's going on, but you and Emma can't stay out here. It's not safe." Sarah's focus sharpened again, and for a moment, Marcus saw a fierce protectiveness flash in her eyes. "We're fine," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You're not fine," Marcus said gently. "You're both soaked and cold. Emma is shivering." As if his words had broken some kind of spell, Sarah suddenly seemed to truly see her daughter for the first time since Marcus had approached. The sight of Emma's blue lips and shaking body sent a shock through her system. "Oh, God," she whispered, dropping to her knees and pulling Emma into her arms. "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. Mommy's so sorry." Marcus watched as Sarah held her daughter tightly, rocking back and forth in the rain. For the first time, tears began to mix with the rainwater on her face. "We need to get you both somewhere warm," Marcus said. "There's a coffee shop just down the street. It's still open." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have any money." "That's not important right now," Marcus replied. "What's important is getting Emma out of this storm." Sarah looked up at him, suspicion and desperation warring in her expression. "Why do you care? You don't even know us." It was a fair question, and one Marcus didn't have a good answer for. In his normal life, he would have called the police or social services and let professionals handle the situation. But something about this moment felt different, more immediate and personal than anything he had experienced in years. "I don't know," he said honestly. but I can't just walk away and leave you both out here." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, searching for some hidden motive. What she saw there seemed to surprise her. "You really mean that?" "I do." She looked down at Emma, who was shivering so hard she could barely speak. The maternal instinct that had been dulled by her own pain suddenly roared back to life. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, but just until the storm passes." Marcus helped them both to their feet, noting how unsteady Sarah seemed. When was the last time she had eaten or slept? He guided them toward the coffee shop, his expensive suit forgotten as he focused on making sure they didn't slip on the wet pavement. The warmth of the coffee shop enveloped them as they stepped inside. The few other customers looked up curiously at the unlikely trio, but Marcus barely noticed. He was focused on Sarah and Emma, who stood dripping on the welcome mat, looking lost and uncertain. "Let's get you a table by the heater," Marcus said, steering them toward a corner booth. "Emma, what would you like to drink? Hot chocolate?" Emma nodded eagerly, the first sign of animation she had shown. Sarah started to protest about not being able to pay, but Marcus held up a hand to stop her. "Please," he said, "let me do this." While Marcus ordered drinks and food, Sarah used napkins to try to dry Emma's hair. The little girl was starting to warm up, but Sarah still seemed distant, as if she were fighting to stay present in the moment. Marcus returned with hot chocolate for Emma, coffee for Sarah, and a selection of sandwiches and soup. He noticed how carefully Sarah watched Emma eat, making sure the little girl got the best pieces while barely touching anything herself. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked gently. Sarah shrugged. "Yesterday, I think, maybe the day before." The casual way she said it hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a woman who had been starving herself to make sure her child had food, and she mentioned it as if it were nothing more than forgetting to check her email. "Sarah," he said carefully, "can you tell me what happened? What brought you out into the storm like that?" For a moment, he thought she wasn't going to answer. She stared into her coffee cup, watching the steam rise. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet he had to lean forward to hear her. "We got evicted today," she said. "I came home from work, and all our stuff was on the sidewalk. The landlord changed the locks." Marcus felt his chest tighten. "Didn't you have any warning?" A bitter smile crossed Sarah's face. "Oh, I had warning. 3 months' worth of final notices. I kept thinking I could catch up, that something would change. I've been working 2 jobs, but Emma got sick last month and the medical bills." She trailed off, shaking her head. "What about family? Friends?" "My parents died in a car accident when Emma was a baby. My sister lives in another state and she's got her own problems. As for friends..." Sarah's voice grew even quieter. "It's amazing how fast people disappear when you can't keep up anymore." Marcus watched Emma, who was contentedly drinking her hot chocolate, oblivious to the adult conversation. "Where were you planning to go tonight?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "I called every shelter in the city. They're all full. There's a waiting list, but..." She gestured helplessly. "So you just stood out in the storm?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I couldn't think of anything else to do. Everything I tried failed. Every door I knocked on was closed. I just stopped. I couldn't take another step forward, and I couldn't figure out how to go back." Marcus understood then what Giuseppe had seen, what had drawn him across the street in the first place. Sarah hadn't been waiting for rescue. She had reached the point where the weight of trying to survive had become too much to bear, and she had simply stopped. The realization sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. This was what giving up looked like. Not dramatic or violent, but quiet and still and devastatingly final. If he hadn't happened to come out of his building at that exact moment, if Giuseppe hadn't noticed her standing there. Marcus looked at Emma, happily warming her hands on her cup, trusting completely in her mother's ability to keep her safe. The little girl had no idea how close they had both come to a tragedy that would have made tomorrow's headlines for a day before being forgotten. "Sarah," he said, his voice firm with sudden decision, "you and Emma are coming home with me tonight." Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. "What? No, I can't. We can't do that." "Yes, you can," Marcus said calmly. "I have a house with plenty of room. You both need a safe, warm place to sleep tonight, and I can provide that." "I don't take charity," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with defiance. "Especially not from strangers." Marcus could see the pride fighting with desperation in her eyes. Even at her lowest point, she was trying to maintain some dignity, some sense of self-reliance. He respected that, but he also knew that pride could be a luxury that neither she nor Emma could afford right now. "It's not charity," he said. "Think of it as a temporary solution while we figure out something more permanent." "We?" Sarah repeated, suspicion creeping back into her voice. Marcus paused, surprised by his own choice of words. When had this become we? When had their problem become his responsibility? But even as he questioned his motives, he found himself doubling down on the commitment. "Look," he said, "I know this is strange. I know you have no reason to trust me, but Emma needs a warm bed and a good night's sleep. Tomorrow, when the storm passes and the shelters open up, we can figure out next steps. But tonight, let me help." Sarah looked down at Emma, who had finished her hot chocolate and was now leaning heavily against her mother's side, exhaustion finally taking hold. The little girl's eyes were drooping, and her small body was still trembling slightly from the cold. "Mommy, I'm tired," Emma whispered. The sound of her daughter's voice broke something inside Sarah. Marcus watched her face crumple as the full weight of their situation crashed over her again. "I know, baby," Sarah whispered back, stroking Emma's damp hair. "I know you are." She looked back up at Marcus, tears streaming down her face. "Why would you do this? You don't know anything about me. I could be dangerous. I could be lying about everything." "Are you?" Marcus asked simply. Sarah shook her head. "No, but how do you know that?" Marcus considered the question. In his business world, he never made decisions based on intuition alone. Every deal was researched, every contract reviewed by teams of lawyers, every risk carefully calculated. But sitting in this coffee shop, looking at an exhausted mother and her trusting child, all of his usual analysis seemed irrelevant. "I don't know," he said finally, "but I'm willing to take the chance." Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What if I say no?" "Then I'll help you find another solution. Maybe call some contacts, see if there are other options we haven't explored yet." "And if I say yes?" "Then you and Emma get a safe place to sleep tonight, and tomorrow we figure out what comes next." Sarah was quiet for a long time, holding her daughter close. Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across her face, the fear of trusting a stranger warring with the desperate need to protect her child. "I have conditions," she said finally. "Name them." "I want to call my sister, let her know where we are, and I want your full name and address to give to her." Marcus nodded. "Marcus Chen. I live at 142 Oakwood Drive in the Hillcrest neighborhood. Your sister can look me up online if she wants. I'm not hard to find." Sarah pulled an old cell phone from her pocket. "The battery is almost dead, but I have enough for one call." "You can use my phone, or the landline at my house, to call her again once we get there," Marcus offered. "Okay," Sarah said, then added quickly, "but this is just for tonight. Tomorrow I figure things out on my own." "Understood." Marcus paid the bill while Sarah called her sister, speaking in low tones. He could hear only fragments of the conversation, but it was clear that Sarah was getting some kind of confirmation that this was the right decision. The drive to Marcus's house was quiet. Emma fell asleep in the back seat within minutes, exhausted from the day's trauma. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, tense and alert, occasionally glancing back at her daughter. "Tell me about her," Marcus said, trying to ease the tension. Sarah's face softened as she looked at Emma. "She's 4. Her birthday was last month. She loves books and drawing and asking a million questions about everything. She's the smartest person I know." "What about her father?" Sarah's expression hardened. "Not in the picture. Never was, really. It's just been Emma and me since the beginning." Marcus turned onto his street, lined with large houses set back from the road behind well-manicured lawns. He watched Sarah's face as they pulled into his driveway, saw her take in the size of his house with something that looked like discomfort. "This is where you live?" she asked. "Yes." "Just you?" "Just me." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I don't understand this. I don't understand you." Marcus turned off the engine and looked at her seriously. "Sarah, I've spent the last 15 years building a business and accumulating things. Tonight, for the first time in longer than I can remember, I have the chance to do something that actually matters. Please don't take that away from me." Something in his voice made Sarah really look at him for the first time. She saw past the expensive clothes and the successful exterior to something deeper, a loneliness that matched her own, though it came from entirely different circumstances. "Okay," she said quietly, "but I meant what I said about tomorrow." Marcus's house was everything Sarah had expected, large, immaculate, and filled with expensive furniture that looked like it had never been truly lived in, but it was warm and dry, and there was a guest room with a comfortable bed where Emma could sleep safely. While Marcus showed them around, Sarah noticed details that surprised her. There were no personal photos anywhere, no signs of family or close friends. The kitchen looked barely used, and the living room had the feeling of a showpiece rather than a space where someone actually relaxed. "You really do live here alone," she observed. "Work keeps me busy," Marcus said, but there was something defensive in his tone. Sarah helped Emma change into one of Marcus's old t-shirts, which was huge on her small frame but warm and dry. The little girl was asleep almost before her head hit the pillow. Downstairs, Marcus had made more coffee and laid out some clothes that Sarah could change into, a sweatshirt and sweatpants that would be too big but would serve the purpose. "The bathroom is down the hall," he said. "Take as long as you need. I'll be in the kitchen." When Sarah emerged 20 minutes later, warm and dry for the first time in hours, she found Marcus sitting at his kitchen island with his laptop open, working despite the late hour. "Do you ever stop?" she asked. Marcus looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Working. Do you ever just stop?" He considered the question. "Not really. There's always something that needs attention." Sarah poured herself a cup of coffee and sat across from him. "That sounds exhausting." "I'm used to it." "That doesn't mean it's not exhausting." Marcus closed his laptop and really looked at her for the first time since they had arrived at his house. Without the stress lines of desperation etched on her face, and with her hair dried and pulled back, Sarah looked younger than he had initially thought. There was an intelligence in her eyes that spoke of someone who had been knocked down by circumstances, not by any failure of character. "What did you do before?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. "Before I became homeless?" Sarah said bluntly. "I was a nurse. Pediatric ICU." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "What happened?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Life happened. Emma got sick when she was 3, really sick. I took time off to be with her, used up all my sick leave and vacation time. When she got better, my position had been filled. The new job I found paid less, and by then I was behind on everything. It's amazing how fast things can spiral when you don't have any safety net. Couldn't the hospital have held your position?" "They could have. They didn't." Turns out caring for your sick child isn't considered a valid excuse for missing work, even when you're caring for other people's sick children for a living. Marcus thought about his own company's policies, wondered how many people he had unknowingly pushed into similar situations with decisions that seemed reasonable in a boardroom, but devastating in real life. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. Sarah shrugged. "It is what it is. Or it was. I still don't know what it's going to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "When you saw me standing out there tonight, what did you think?" Marcus considered lying, giving her some sanitized version of his thoughts. But something about the honesty she had shown deserved the same in return. "I thought you had given up," he said quietly. "I thought you were past the point where you could keep fighting." Sarah nodded slowly. "You were right. I had. For about an hour, I completely gave up. I couldn't see any way forward, and I was so tired of trying and failing that I just stopped." "What changed?" "You," she said simply. "You reminded me that Emma was counting on me, that giving up wasn't really an option no matter how impossible everything seemed." Marcus felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat. "I didn't do anything special." "Yes, you did," Sarah said firmly. "You saw us, really saw us, not as a problem to be solved or avoided, but as people who mattered. Do you know how rare that is?" Marcus thought about his daily life, about how he moved through the world focused on his goals and achievements, barely noticing the people around him unless they served some purpose in his plans. "I'm beginning to understand that," he said. Sarah finished her coffee and stood up. "I should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Sarah," Marcus said as she reached the kitchen doorway, "what if tomorrow doesn't have to be about finding somewhere else to go? What if we could find a different solution?" She turned back to look at him, hope and fear fighting in her expression. "What kind of solution?" "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted, "but maybe we could figure it out together." For the first time since he had met her, Sarah smiled. It was small and uncertain, but it was real. "Maybe," she said. "We'll see." As Marcus listened to Sarah's footsteps going up the stairs, he realized that for the first time in years, he was looking forward to tomorrow not because of what he might accomplish, but because of what he might learn. About Sarah, about Emma, and about parts of himself that he had forgotten existed. Marcus woke up at 6 a.m., just as he always did. But for the first time in years, work wasn't the first thing on his mind. Instead, he found himself listening for sounds from upstairs, wondering if Sarah and Emma had slept well. He made coffee and started breakfast, realizing as he did so that he couldn't remember the last time he had cooked for anyone other than himself. The simple act of making pancakes felt strangely meaningful. Emma appeared first, drawn downstairs by the smell of food. She stood in the kitchen doorway in Marcus's oversized t-shirt, looking small and uncertain. "Good morning, Emma," Marcus said gently. "Did you sleep okay?" She nodded, then whispered, "Is my mommy still here?" "She's upstairs. She'll be down soon. Are you hungry?" Emma nodded again, more enthusiastically this time. Marcus helped her climb onto one of the kitchen stools and placed a plate of pancakes in front of her, along with a glass of orange juice. "These are really good," Emma said after taking a bite. "My mommy makes pancakes too, but we ran out of the stuff to make them." Marcus felt that familiar tightness in his chest. "Well, you can have as many as you want." Sarah appeared a few minutes later, looking more rested than she had the night before, but still carrying the weight of uncertainty about what the day would bring. "Good morning," she said, accepting the cup of coffee Marcus offered. "Thank you for breakfast, and for last night. I can't remember the last time Emma slept so well." She's welcome to sleep that well every night, Marcus said, then immediately regretted how presumptuous that sounded. I mean, I know what you meant, Sarah said quietly. But Marcus, I can't accept that kind of help. It wouldn't be fair to you, and it wouldn't be right for Emma to get attached to something that can't last. Marcus sat down across from her. What if it could last? What if we could find a way to make this work for everyone? Sarah shook her head. You live in a different world than we do. Eventually, you'll realize that having us here complicates your life in ways you didn't expect. You'll get tired of the responsibility, or you'll meet someone who doesn't want us around, or you'll just decide that this was a nice gesture, but not a permanent solution. What if you're wrong? Marcus asked. What if I'm not? They looked at each other across the kitchen island, both recognizing the fundamental truth in what Sarah had said. Their worlds were indeed very different, and good intentions didn't always survive the reality of daily life. Let me ask you this, Marcus said finally. What would it take for you to believe that this could work? What would need to change or happen for you to feel secure about staying here? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, watching Emma eat her pancakes. I would need to be able to contribute something real. I can't just live off your charity. I would need a job, a way to pay my own way. What about going back to nursing? I'd love to, but it's not that simple. My license lapsed when I couldn't afford the renewal fees. I'd need to take courses to get recertified, which costs money I don't have. And even then, most hospitals want references from recent employers. She laughed bitterly. My last job ended when they fired me for missing too much work to take care of my sick daughter. That's not exactly a glowing recommendation. Marcus thought about this. In his business world, problems like this were solved by making strategic connections and leveraging resources. But he was beginning to understand that Sarah's world operated by different rules, where past mistakes could follow you indefinitely, and where the systems designed to help people often created more barriers than they removed. What if we could solve the certification problem? He asked. How? I sit on the board of Metropolitan Hospital. They have programs for nurses returning to the workforce. I could make some calls. Sarah's expression grew guarded. I don't want special treatment because you know somebody. It wouldn't be special treatment. It would be making sure you get access to programs that already exist, but that people don't always know about. And what would you want in return? Marcus was surprised by the question. Nothing. I would want nothing in return. Everyone wants something in return, Marcus. That's how the world works. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his perfectly manicured backyard. What I want, he said slowly, is to feel like my life means something beyond just accumulating more success. What I want is to go to sleep at night knowing that I did something that mattered. What I want is to not feel so alone in this big house anymore. The honesty of his answer seemed to surprise them both. Sarah studied his face, searching for hidden motives and finding only vulnerability. You're really serious about this, she said. I am. Even though it would change everything about how you live? Especially because it would change everything about how I live. Emma, who had been quietly eating and listening to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. Mommy, does this mean we can stay? Sarah looked at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Marcus. I don't know, baby. It's complicated. What's complicated about it? Emma asked with the straightforward logic of childhood. Well, Sarah said carefully, Mr. Marcus has his own life and we have ours. And sometimes things that seem simple aren't really simple. Emma considered this seriously. But you said we didn't have anywhere to go. That's true. And Mr. Marcus said we could stay here. He did say that. And I like it here. It's warm, and there are pancakes, and Mr. Marcus is nice. Sarah felt tears threatening. From Emma's perspective, the solution was obvious. It was only the adult world of pride and fear and past disappointments that made it complicated. "What do you think, Emma?" Marcus asked gently. "Would you like to stay here for a while?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "Yes. And maybe you could teach me to make pancakes like these?" Marcus smiled. "I'd like that very much." Sarah watched the interaction between Marcus and her daughter, seeing something she hadn't expected. Marcus wasn't just being kind to Emma as a way to win over Sarah. He genuinely enjoyed the little girl's company, answering her questions with patience and treating her like a person worth listening to. "Okay," Sarah said suddenly. Both Marcus and Emma looked at her. "Okay," Marcus repeated. "We'll try it, for a few weeks, maybe a month. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I pay rent as soon as I'm working again, even if it's not much at first. I take care of my own expenses and Emma's. I help with housework and cooking. And if either of us feels like this isn't working, we can leave without hard feelings." Marcus nodded. "Agreed. But I have a condition too." "What's that?" "You let me help you get back on your feet without constantly questioning my motives. This works better if we trust each other." Sarah extended her hand. "Deal." They shook hands across the kitchen island while Emma applauded, not entirely understanding what they had agreed to, but sensing that it was good news. 3 weeks later, Marcus came home from work to find Sarah in the kitchen making dinner and Emma at the kitchen table doing homework from the preschool program Marcus had helped her enroll in. The scene was so different from his usual empty house that he paused in the doorway, struck by how natural it all felt. "How was your day?" Sarah asked, looking up from the stove. "Good. I made those calls about the nursing program. You have an appointment next Tuesday to discuss your options." Sarah's face lit up. "Really?" "Really. And the director I spoke to seemed very interested when I mentioned your pediatric ICU experience. Apparently they're short-staffed in that department." Emma looked up from her coloring book. "Marcus, will you help me with my numbers after dinner?" "Of course," Marcus said, realizing that this was what coming home should feel like. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Sarah and Marcus sat in the living room that had finally started to feel lived in. Sarah was reviewing materials for her nursing recertification while Marcus worked on his laptop, but for the first time, he found himself distracted from work by something better. "Marcus," Sarah said, closing her book, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you ever regret it, taking us in that night?" Marcus thought about his answer carefully. The last 3 weeks had been different from anything he had ever experienced. His routines had been disrupted. His quiet house was now filled with the sounds of daily life, and his careful control over his environment had been completely upended. It was the best 3 weeks he could remember. "Not for a second," he said. "Do you ever regret saying yes?" Sarah looked around the room, taking in the evidence of how their lives had intertwined. Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, Sarah's nursing textbooks on the coffee table, the comfortable chaos of people actually living in the space. "No," she said, "but I'm still scared." "Of what?" "Of getting too comfortable, of Emma getting too attached, of forgetting that this could all end tomorrow." Marcus closed his laptop and turned to face her fully. "Sarah, what happened to you before doesn't have to happen again. Not everyone will let you down." "How do I know that? How do I know you're different?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I guess you don't. But maybe that's what trust is, believing in something good even when you can't know for sure." Sarah nodded slowly. "Maybe." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same spot where he had first seen Sarah and Emma in the storm. The memory felt like it belonged to a different lifetime, even though it had been less than a year ago. Sarah was working full-time at the hospital now, her nursing skills quickly earning her the respect of her colleagues. Emma was thriving in school and had filled Marcus's house with the kind of warmth he had never known he was missing. The three of them had become a family in ways that none of them had planned, but all of them had needed. Marcus had learned that success meant more than business achievements. Sarah had learned that not all doors would close in her face, and Emma had learned that sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places. As Marcus walked back to the office building where his story with Sarah and Emma had begun, he thought about the man he had been that night, successful but empty, accomplished but alone. That man would never have imagined stopping to help strangers in a storm, much less inviting them to change his life completely. But standing in the rain that night, seeing Sarah at her breaking point with Emma clinging to her side, Marcus had glimpsed something he had spent years unknowingly searching for: the chance to matter to someone, to be part of something larger than his own ambitions. The storm had ended, but what it had brought together remained. And for the first time in his life, Marcus understood that the most important success stories weren't the ones that made headlines, but the ones that happened quietly, one day at a time. In the space between strangers becoming family,